You know what's worse than losing someone who cared deeply for you? It's realizing, too late, that you pushed away the very thing you secretly craved. Avoidants often tell themselves they're fine on their own, but when someone who truly cared finally leaves, that's when the silence becomes deafening. We don't always notice the weight of someone's presence until it's gone. For avoidants, this is amplified. They pride themselves on being independent, but when they lose someone who genuinely saw them, loved them, and fought for them, the pain hits in ways they didn't expect. Avoidants often think they're protecting themselves by holding back, but what they don't realize is they're creating the very pain they fear most, losing the person who truly wanted to stay. And once that kind of love is gone, the regret can last far longer than the relationship itself. At first, an avoidant convinces themselves that nothing has really changed. They sit in the silence and tell themselves, "This is fine. This is who I am. I've always been good on my own." Independence has been their shield for so long that they almost wear it like armor. But that first week without the person who cared, something subtle starts to shift. The little moments that used to feel like space now feel like gaps. The quiet that once felt like control starts to sound like emptiness. It usually doesn't hit in one dramatic wave. It creeps in slowly like an echo bouncing off the walls. They notice that their phone isn't lighting up with a thoughtful text anymore. The good morning and good night messages, the tiny check-ins, the reassurance that someone was there in their corner, that thread has been cut. At first, they might shrug it off, saying they never needed it anyway. But late at night, or in those moments of pause between distractions, the absence becomes impossible to ignore. What an avoidant doesn't always realize while they're in the relationship is how much stability the other person was providing. That presence softened the edges of their world, even when they pretended they didn't need it. When it's gone, there's no buffer, just raw space. The silence becomes a mirror they can't escape. They see their own patterns reflected back at them, and it's uncomfortable. They said they wanted freedom, but what they got feels more like abandonment, even though they were the ones who pushed. The shock of emptiness isn't just about missing the person. It's about losing the routine of being cared for, even if they resisted it while it was happening. Avoidants often mistake consistency for pressure, but once that consistency vanishes, they realize it was actually safety. The other person's love was a tether, grounding them in ways they didn't even recognize. Without it, they feel unanchored. The world starts to feel lonelier, not because they've never been alone before, but because now they know what it's like not to be. And here's the part that really cuts. This emptiness doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It doesn't shout, it whispers. It sneaks into the small, everyday moments, coming home to no one checking in, eating alone with no playful banter, scrolling through their phone and realizing the one person who used to make the day lighter isn't there anymore. They might try to fill the space with work, hobbies, or distractions, but the truth sits underneath it all. I lost something real. For someone who has built their identity on not needing anyone, this shock is deeply unsettling. It challenges the story they've been telling themselves their whole life, that solitude is strength, that needing connection is weakness. But when the person who cared is gone, solitude feels less like strength and more like punishment. That's when they start to understand that their independence was never true freedom. It was a cage they decorated to look like safety. The emptiness after losing someone who truly cared forces them to face a paradox. They wanted space, but now space feels suffocating. They thought they'd feel relief, but instead they feel a heaviness pressing down on them. And the cruel irony is that by the time they recognize the value of what they had, the person who provided it is no longer there to fill the silence. The shock isn't just about losing love, it's about realizing that love had become part of their sense of normal, even if they never admitted it out loud. An avoidant spends much of their life convinced that they understand themselves better than anyone else. They pride themselves on being logical, self-sufficient, and in control of their emotions. They repeat the same story internally. I don't really need closeness. I don't need someone hovering around me. I'm fine on my own. It's a belief they've carried for years, one that feels safe and unshakable. But after losing someone who truly cared, that belief begins to crack. Suddenly, the story doesn't add up anymore, and they're left confronting a painful realization. They misunderstood themselves all along. It begins when the absence of care starts to highlight the truth of their needs. They used to brush off affection, dismiss kind gestures, or feel suffocated by vulnerability. But when it's gone, a strange longing takes its place. The avoidant finds themselves missing the warmth of a hand on their back, the comfort of knowing someone would listen, the grounding feeling of having someone in their corner. They begin to see that all the closeness they once labeled as too much was actually what they needed. This contradiction is disorienting. It's as if they've spent their life reading a map upside down, only to realize they were moving away from the very place they wanted to reach. The hardest part of this realization is that it isn't just about the other person, it's about the self-deception. They thought independence was their highest value, but what they really wanted was connection on terms that felt safe. They didn't want to be smothered, but they did want to be understood. They didn't want constant intensity, but they did crave a steady presence. They spent so much time defending against closeness that they never learned how to embrace it. And when they finally see this, regret begins to creep in. Not just regret over the relationship, but regret over all the years they spent misreading their own heart. This realization also carries shame. How could they not have known what they truly wanted? How could they push away the very thing they secretly longed for? It feels like betrayal of themselves and betrayal of the person who tried to love them. They start to replay moments in their mind, the times they dismissed affection, the times they shut down a conversation, the times they rolled their eyes at gestures that were meant to show care. Each memory stings because it now reveals their misunderstanding in stark clarity. What they once thought of as strength, resisting closeness, was actually avoidance of the thing they needed most. And this isn't just about losing love, it's about losing trust in themselves. If they could be so wrong about their own needs, what else don't they understand about who they are? The ground feels shaky. Independence was the pillar they built their identity on, but now that pillar is cracked. They wanted to believe they were untouchable, but the pain of losing someone who cared proves otherwise. They're not untouched, they're human, with all the messy desires and vulnerabilities they tried to deny. What makes this pain even heavier is the realization that the other person already knew. The one who cared probably saw through the far aid. They likely knew the avoidant wanted closeness, even when they pushed it away. They stayed patient, they stayed kind, and they tried to love the avoidant anyway. But patience has limits, and when the other person finally left, it left the avoidant holding up a mirror they couldn't turn away from. That mirror shows them the contradiction of their own story. They told themselves they didn't want intimacy, but their heartbreak proves they did. They told themselves they were fine without reassurance, but the hollow ache inside them proves they weren't. They told themselves they didn't need love, but the longing they feel now proves they were wrong. And in that recognition, the avoidant realizes that perhaps the greatest misunderstanding wasn't between them and their partner, it was between them and themselves. There is a very particular kind of pain that comes when someone who truly cared finally walks away. For an avoidant, it feels almost surreal. They spent so much time convincing themselves that this person would always be there, that their patience was endless, that their love could withstand the distance and the walls. They grew accustomed to being forgiven, to having their silences tolerated, to receiving affection even when they struggled to return it. And then one day that well of unconditional care dries up. The door closes, and it hits them in a way they never expected. It wasn't just love they lost, it was rare love, the kind they may never encounter again. Avoidants often underestimate the resilience of someone who cares deeply. They believe their partner will continue to stay no matter what, because history has shown them that this person endures. Every withdrawal was met with another attempt at closeness. Every cold response was softened with compassion. Every deflection of intimacy was countered with patience. Over time, the avoidant began to assume this was simply the natural order, that no matter how much they resisted, the other person would always return. So when the day finally comes that this person decides to stop trying, the shock is piercing. It breaks an unspoken contract the avoidant thought would never expire. What makes it so painful is not just the absence, but the memory of the effort that came before it. They can recall countless moments where the person showed care that was not earned, but freely given. The times they brought comfort when the avoidant was in pain. The times they stayed up late to listen when the avoidant was overwhelmed. the times they extended kindness even when they themselves were hurting. All of these memories come flooding back, but instead of being soothing, they burn. Because now they represent opportunities squandered, gifts unappreciated, love taken for granted. For the avoidant, losing unconditional care is particularly devastating because it strips away the illusion that love is replaceable. They may have told themselves, if this ends, I'll be fine. There are other people. I don't need anyone. But deep down, they knew this person's way of loving was unique. It wasn't transactional, it wasn't shallow, it was consistent, enduring, and sincere. That kind of care is not easily found, and in their quietest moments, the avoidant knows it. The pain comes not just from losing love, but from losing the rare safety of being seen and accepted even in their most difficult moments. There's also a cruel irony at play. While the person was present, the avoidant often minimized their care, treating it as ordinary or even overwhelming. But in its absence, they realize it was extraordinary. It's only after it's gone that they recognize how much strength it takes to love someone who resists closeness. They start to understand that patience is not infinite, and that the care they thought of as unconditional was actually a gift with limits. And by the time they come to terms with that, the chance to receive it is gone. The avoidant is left with a hollow ache that's sharper than loneliness. It's not just that they are alone now, it's that they are alone without the one person who proved that love could survive their walls. They feel the loss in quiet, ordinary moments, making coffee without anyone to share it with, hearing good news and realizing there's no one eager to celebrate, going through a hard day and knowing there's no text waiting to check if they're okay. Each of these moments is a reminder not just of absence, but of the fact that someone once filled that role and now they don't. What lingers most is the knowledge that they were loved deeply, despite their resistance, and that love eventually ran out of road. The avoidant realizes they were not abandoned quickly or lightly. They were loved fiercely and persistently until that love could no longer sustain itself. And that truth is both devastating and humbling. It forces them to confront the fact that unconditional care is not an endless fountain, but a precious resource. And when it is gone, it leaves behind a silence that feels heavier than any solitude they've ever known. Regret has a way of creeping in quietly, especially for someone who avoids expressing emotions. For an avoidant, the heaviest regret after losing someone who cared deeply is not usually about the big fights or even the breakup itself. It's about the words they never said, all the feelings they buried, the gratitude they kept locked away, the love they were too afraid to put into words. Those silences, which once felt like protection, turn into echoes that haunt them long after the relationship is gone. They remember moments when the other person did something kind or thoughtful, and instead of saying thank you, they nodded or brushed it off. At the time, it didn't feel like a big deal. The avoidant believed actions were enough, that unspoken affection would somehow be understood. But now, in hindsight, they realize how much power those words could have carried, how a simple acknowledgement might have reassured their partner, made them feel valued, or reminded them why they stayed. Those unsaid words are now permanent gaps, reminders of love that was felt but never shared. There's also the missed chance to be vulnerable. The avoidant often felt love but couldn't say it out loud. They felt appreciation but kept it hidden. They wanted to express admiration but swallowed it because vulnerability felt like exposure. Now that the relationship has ended, they replay those moments in their mind, the times they should have said, I love you, or I need you, or even, I'm scared of losing you. Instead, they said nothing, or worse, they said something dismissive to keep the walls intact. Those choices, which once felt like control, now feel like chains of regret. It becomes especially painful when they realize how much their silence was misinterpreted. What they intended as self-protection, the other person often experienced as indifference. The partner who cared might have wondered if their love was one-sided, if the avoidant even noticed the effort, if the affection meant anything at all. And while the avoidant may have felt deeply inside, their refusal to express it created a story in which they seemed cold or detached. Once the relationship ends, they finally see how their silence wrote the wrong narrative, one that cost them the person they didn't want to lose. This regret doesn't just live in memory, it shows up in everyday moments after the breakup. The avoidant might hear a song that reminds them of their partner and feel an urge to reach out, to finally say the words they never said. But pride or fear keeps them quiet again, and the cycle continues. They may scroll through old photos, remembering the warmth of being loved, and feel the weight of knowing they never returned that warmth in words. It's not just loss they feel, it's the frustration of realizing they had all the opportunities to bridge the gap and chose silence every time. There is also the pain of finality. When someone who cared deeply is still around, there's always the possibility of saying the things left unsaid. But when that person has walked away, moved on, or closed the door for good, the unsaid words become permanent. The avoidant is left with a backlog of feelings they'll never be able to express to the one person who most deserved to hear them. That permanence makes the regret sharper because it isn't just about the past, it shapes the way they carry themselves into the future. The silence they once relied on now becomes their torment. They realize that love unspoken can feel the same as love unlived. And while they thought they were protecting themselves by keeping their guard up, they were really starving the relationship of the very nourishment it needed to survive. That truth sinks in slowly but heavily, turning every unspoken word into a reminder that sometimes it's not the things we say that ruin relationships, but the things we don't. When the person who truly cared is gone, one of the most haunting feelings for an avoidant is the fear of future isolation. At first, they may try to convince themselves that nothing has changed, that solitude is familiar, that being on their own has always been the safest place. But beneath that surface, a new fear begins to stir. What if I never find that kind of love again? It is a thought that can feel paralyzing because it challenges the belief they've built their entire identity on. That they don't need anyone, that they're better off alone. The memory of being cared for lingers, and now they can't deny what it felt like to have someone steady beside them. They may try to block it out, but everyday reminders bring it back. The person who used to check in after a long day, the one who remembered small details, the one who accepted them even when they were difficult, those moments become benchmarks. And the avoidant knows deep down that not everyone will offer that kind of care. The rarity of it makes the loss sting even more. They begin to ask themselves questions they don't want to answer. Did I push away the best chance I'll ever have? What if I've closed the door on love for good? This fear grows in quiet moments when distractions fade. They might be sitting alone on a Sunday morning, coffee in hand, with no one to share the moment with. They might watch couples laugh together in a restaurant or see a friend's partner support them through something difficult. Suddenly, solitude doesn't feel like strength anymore. It feels like exile. They realize that independence, while comforting in theory, doesn't hold up against the human need for connection. And the fear takes root. What if no one else ever loves me through my walls again? For someone who has spent their life resisting closeness, this fear is disorienting. It forces them to confront the very thing they've been running from: vulnerability. They start to see how their avoidance has created a cycle. They push people away to protect themselves, but that very act creates the loneliness they're afraid of. Losing someone who cared exposes the cost of that cycle, and the future suddenly feels less secure. They imagine meeting someone new, but wonder if they'll sabotage it again, if their patterns will repeat, if they even deserve another chance. The fear of future isolation is not just about being alone, it's about being alone with regret. The avoidant knows now what it feels like to be loved deeply, and they also know what it feels like to lose that love. That knowledge changes the texture of solitude. It's no longer a neutral state, but a reminder of what they had and lost. Every time they feel the weight of silence, they remember the warmth that used to fill it, and the thought that they may never experience that again makes the silence heavier than ever before. In some ways, this fear is also about self-doubt. They begin to question if they are even capable of sustaining the kind of relationship they long for. They think back to the ways they resisted vulnerability, the times they avoided hard conversations, the moments they shut down instead of opening up. If they couldn't hold on to someone who was willing to fight for them, how will they ever hold on to someone new? This doubt lingers, whispering that they might repeat the same mistakes until love simply stops showing up for them altogether. The fear of future isolation becomes a shadow that follows them into every interaction. They may smile, socialize, or distract themselves with work, but underneath it all is the quiet terror of being alone for good. It's not the solitude itself that's unbearable. It's the idea that the kind of connection they once had may never return. And for an avoidant, that realization is often the hardest to live with, because it proves that in trying so hard to protect themselves from being hurt, they may have created the very outcome they feared most, a life where no one truly stays. When someone who truly cared walks out of our lives, the lessons left behind are not just about them, they're about us. Avoidants often believe they're protecting themselves by holding back, but the truth is what they protect in the moment can turn into the very regret that keeps them awake at night. Losing someone who cared doesn't just show us what we lost, it shows us what we actually needed all along. And maybe that's the hidden gift inside the pain, the emptiness, the regret, the longing. They're not just punishments, they're reminders. Reminders that connection matters, that words matter, that love, when given the chance, is worth more than the fear that holds us back. Because what hurts most is not the love we gave, but the love we were too afraid to share. So if you take one thing from this, let it be this: closeness is not a weakness. Needing someone is not a flaw. Vulnerability may feel risky, but the real risk is in never letting anyone close enough to see the truth of who you are. Because the greatest loss isn't when someone leaves. It's when love was right in front of you and you never allowed yourself to hold it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for reflecting with me. And thank you for being open to a conversation that isn't always easy. My hope is that if you've ever recognized yourself in these patterns, you walk away not with guilt, but with a little more courage to love differently next time. Goodbye for now, and thank you once again for your time and attention.